Hello, I'm Andrea, and welcome back to my writing channel. It is a perfect day to film today because it's pouring rain, and I absolutely love a rainy day for reading, for filming, for doing anything kind of cozy. So I decided to do a fun topic today for my video, and I hope if you do hear the rain outside, it's just like a little bit of pitter-pattering to add some ambiance. I've done videos in the past about tropes that I like and I dislike, and of course I've talked about the stuff that I write, including some of the themes, some of the subjects that I cover in some of my stories. But I thought today what might be kind of fun is to take a little bit of a different perspective and talk about not necessarily tropes or story elements or themes that I dislike, or even ones that I like, but talk about ones that I just haven't written in my own stories. I think it's going to be fun. I had a lot of fun writing some stuff down. I had a lot of runners-up that I didn't include in this video, so maybe I'll make another one, or maybe I'll just chat with you down in the comments below about this subject. But it's really fun to think about what I haven't written yet. Of course, there's so many things that I haven't written, but I didn't necessarily want this to be things that I won't write or that I'll never write, because I hate that finality of like committing to not writing it. Not that anyone is gonna hold me accountable. Writers do change their minds, but I'm not even gonna commit to that in this video. These are not necessarily things that I'll never write, but I have some pretty good reasons why I haven't, at least yet. If you are also a writer, I challenge you to leave at least one thing down below in the comments that you haven't written as well. It can be one of these things that are on my list. It can be something entirely different, and I would love to know the reason why. With all of that said, let's get into number one, time travel. I've been talking a lot recently about Doctor Who. I'm kind of getting back on the bandwagon. I think it's with the new Doctor and the new kind of reboot that they're doing. It's made me very nostalgic. Also, I talked about last New York Comic Con. My husband and I cosplayed as Amy Pond and the 11th Doctor. So I'm just living my best like 2011, 2012 dreams all over again. And so I thought a lot about time travel, even more than usual, and I'm more certain than ever before that I am probably never going to write it. Probably. I need those qualifiers in there, but I'm probably never going to write time travel. The possibilities for plot holes, for confusion, for just general chaos in the plot are just too high. It's too risky. It's like flashing red alert danger in my head every time I even think about anything that would have to do with time travel. When I watch something with time travel, when I read something with time travel, I like to just kind of let the rules wash over me. I do like to understand it. I mean, I've looked up the River Song timeline before and tried to figure it out, you know? I enjoy these complex challenges, but if something is not quite clicking, or if something doesn't really work, or if I kind of see a plot hole, I'd rather just leave it like way over there. Let it be a little bit fuzzy and vague. Just let it live, and I will enjoy my, fun episode, or my fun book, or my fun movie, or whatever it is. It's just one of those things that I don't want to have to fully make sense, you know? It's fun, it can bring some very creative new ideas, it can be very unpredictable in a fun way when you're absorbing the content, but I don't want the challenge of actually having to write that, because I am very, very particular about understanding everything and feeling like I've checked all of my bases, and if I open up this can of worms that is time travel, I know I'm just gonna drive myself crazy. I know I'm gonna have so much self-doubt in what I'm doing, and I'm gonna want to tie everything together perfectly. And I think, honestly, the best time travel stories just leave a little bit in the vague. Just leave a little bit like, yeah, okay, it's not super plausible, but just roll with it. Come along on this journey with me. Just let it go and enjoy the story. And I can't let it go when I'm the writer. The second theme, or maybe more of a story element that is on this list for me, is royalty. I have actually never written a story with royalty or royal family or any of those sort of themes that you find in a lot of fantasy, but also historical fiction. I have read quite a lot of either historical fiction or at least fantasy fiction that has to do with royal families. I actually kind of love it sometimes, but it's really hard to feel fresh and new, I think, with the royalty theme, even though it has so much potential. I think so often when you introduce, I don't know, the main character falling in love with a prince, or she becomes a princess, and I'm using like a female protagonist just because that's a lot of the stories that I read, and I think I read a lot of fantasy with royals when I was maybe a teenager in my early 20s, so that's just what comes to mind. But you have a lot of, various aspects and various like takes on it. You have stories about Henry VIII, you have just so many things that, dwell on royalty. And I do enjoy it sometimes, but I think especially because so much, fantasy in particular, has dealt with royalty, and I've just never had a story idea that felt fresh in any way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, of course. Sometimes these things, when you open a book and it's something comforting and familiar and that's exactly what you wanted, sometimes you don't need anything more than that when it comes to that element. And then other things in the story can be fresh and new. But I don't know. I think there's something that feels very done in my mind when it comes to royal themes. So it is very possible I will have an idea in the future, and I'm completely not against writing about a royal family, be it historical fiction or just a fantasy fiction, much more likely to be fantasy fiction. But I just don't really feel that compelled to write it right now, and I've never felt compelled in the past. Even when I was reading a lot of it, I don't think I've ever even had a short story or a random idea when I was, 14 that I wrote anything for. Number 3 might make you mad at me because it's a pretty popular trope, but I will try and not trash it too much. But I have never written a marriage of convenience or necessity or any sort of like forced marriage situation. I won't say never. Never say never. That was the whole point of this video, but I am very, very likely to probably never write one of these unless I really feel like my idea is out of the box and not like most of the marriages of convenience things that I've read. It's not always a turnoff when I read them or watch them in movies or series, but I would say the vast majority of the time it is. I just don't enjoy this idea that much. So I very, very highly doubt I will have an idea that I want to actually write and spend that many hours absorbed in. Not always, but generally to me, it just feels very contrived, which it is, technically. A bit cliche, a little bit just, I don't know, old-fashioned in a way that is not necessarily comforting or familiar like so much of fantasy. I like a good, swords and sorcery sort of fantasy, and I enjoy medieval fantasy. A lot of people don't enjoy it anymore and they're very tired of it, and that's fair. But I love it, give me my Lord of the Rings style fantasy. But when it comes to characters being forced or compelled or in some way just needing to marry somebody for the plot, especially when it's the main character and the whole story is the main character having to marry, somebody, and that all of the things that ensue, and usually they fall in love with that other person eventually. It just, I don't know, there's something about it that I just don't enjoy. It's not even a criticism of it necessarily, it's a me thing. I don't really enjoy it. So I could write it one day. I'm not writing it off completely. Pun, but the characters have to have like such insane chemistry for me to actually want it to happen and for me to actually enjoy the journey of it happening. It's a risky one. Next on the list will be especially fun if you followed me from pretty much the very beginning. Do I have any OG subscribers here from my main channel, not my writing channel, because this goes way back to when my main channel was basically a books and writing channel. Do you remember how harsh I used to be on love triangles? Yeah, love triangles. That is something that, unsurprisingly, I have never written. I think part of my problem is because at the time that I made that love triangle video, if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe it doesn't make sense. I don't even remember what I said in it, to be honest. I just remember it being me saying I don't like love triangles and why I don't like them. So it was kind of probably trashing on love triangles. Maybe not even something I would post today, because I don't know if it had a lot of nuance. Historically, I have been pretty harsh on love triangles, and I spent most of my teens and 20s really, really not liking them. Part of it is probably because when I was in my teens and even 20s, they were everywhere. They were being done in pretty much every YA, and it was like the crux of so many YAs. And there were so many team this and team that, and I just got tired of it, and it started to feel just very forced. Because of that, some of them were being done well and intentionally and probably there and inspired from the start, and others just really felt slotted in. Just like, okay, we have a main character, we have the person that main character is going to romantically end up with, and let's just throw another person in the mix, give them another option. Why not? It got very old, and I think it's already something that it's a little bit challenging to pull off. Some stories are naturally inclined for it, and some just really aren't, and not every story needs one. You don't necessarily need to be guessing which person your main character might end up with. Sometimes it's okay that it's really, really obvious who they're going to end up with, if anyone at all, and you don't need to have tension forced by throwing in a third party who inevitably is not going to be chosen, because usually, not always, but usually it's pretty obvious. And that's another thing that I look for in a good love triangle. I want to imagine the main character could honestly end up with either of the options that the people that the main character is considering being with or is attracted to. I really want to be able to envision them with either one of those people, and I want to be able to believe that the main character really truly cares for either of these people and could have a life with either of these people, even if that life is very different, even if I have a preference for who might be better suited for them or who I would prefer them end up with. I want to be able to believe that either one is an actual option, and not here is, I'll use the typical main character is a young female and there's two guys as an option, because that was what was popular. But so often you have one person who's either really nice and sweet, and then the other guy is really mean, and of course she's gonna end up with the mean guy. Or you have, one guy who's a lump, and it's like, really, seriously? How can she possibly be attracted to that? I mean, he does nothing. He has not earned that, affection at all. And then you have another guy who's super competent and super capable and usually much better looking, and it's like, come on. Like, come on. I want to be able to believe. I want to be able to feel the chemistry of the main character with each of these different options. And even if it's somewhat obvious who they're going to pick, or even if I have a very clear preference who I want them to pick, I still want to have a little bit of that just faith that, it's a real dilemma that this person is going through and not, a contrived situation for tension. That kind of became an updated rant on love triangles. It was not intended to be, but all of that to say, love triangles are very difficult for me. So I've never had an idea that revolves around one. I'm certainly never writing it off because there are really good stories that have love triangles. And if I have an idea, or if it just happens to be that I write a main character and they happen to have two different people who they're interested in, or we have a messy situation with multiple parties and multiple different attractions going different ways, that's cool too. I might have an idea in the future that has to do with that. But for the moment, any romances that I've written have been pretty straightforward and have been a little bit more tension driven by other things and by maybe different friendship relationships that evolve over the course of the story. That's where my stories have found more of their tension, and not from multiple different potential romantic interests. Number 5 is military fantasy, or sort of battles and strategy and those sorts of themes, which are very, very popular in fantasy. I don't have to tell you, that's kind of the backbone of so many fantasy stories. And I love them. I mean, I grew up on Lord of the Rings. I love a good, swords and archers and elves and magic and all of that stuff. I love it. I love a good battle scene, but I have never felt compelled, let's say, to write one yet. I'm sure I will. In fact, this is probably the one on the list that I'm most confident I probably will write at one point, just because so often when you have big and deadly and, the high stakes sorts of stories, they often come with battles. They often come with even wars and, greater overarching things in the world that you're writing. And I probably will write one. I honestly probably will write one, but they terrify me. They absolutely terrify me because this is not my area of expertise. It's not even my area of interest. I'm just not that into strategic challenges like that. Even on a chessboard, I hate chess. You should see me play Assassin's Creed. I'm either in like full stealth mode and I take forever to complete a camp, or I just kind of just run in screaming and waving my sword and just hope that they don't have reinforcements that I didn't know about. I have written some kind of small-scale battle-y sorts of scenes, and of course I've written some action scenes, some life-threatening, danger sorts of scenes, and it's actually something that I really want to get better at writing, so I'd like to incorporate more and more of that into my stories. The novel that I'm working on right now will have at least a few moments where there's some like hand-to-hand, action combat sorts of scenes, but generally I just do not feel drawn to writing these big-scale sorts of scenes, and I think to make it work, you do have to have that strategic, you have to have the scene of the people discussing how they're going to go about the battle before. Otherwise, it's just, fighting and violence and stuff for no real reason. You need to have a reason why your characters are doing what they're doing, even if your character is a pawn in a greater, land. But usually the characters in fantasy are the leaders, the generals, the kings and queens, the princes and princesses, and those sorts of more powerful positions. But regardless of where, what you're writing about, what angle and what perspective you're taking it from, I need to feel like I know what's happening, what the strategy is. I need to feel it if the battle goes wrong. I need to feel why. And that is just really hard to do if you don't have a lot of knowledge, and like me, if you don't necessarily feel drawn to, learning about those sorts of things. You also have to deal with a lot of loss because, any battle, even if the heroes end up winning, will have loss, will have tragedy, will have these really heavy themes that, again, I, love to read about when they're done well, but I'm not particularly drawn to those big scale sorts of themes, at least just yet. The last thing on this list is very fittingly about endings, and that is unhappy endings. You can give me the most beautiful and wonderfully written story in the entire world, and if it has an unhappy ending, I will be mad about it. I don't think I've ever written anything, even a short story in college when I was trying to write literary fiction, which seemed like it should be very pessimistic and depressing. So I did write some stuff that was maybe a little bit more pessimistic than I would normally. But even then, I'm pretty sure all of my endings had at least bittersweet endings, certainly not fully unhappy endings. And I'm okay with a bittersweet ending. I don't mind when there's a little bit of not necessarily pessimism, but, realism to an ending. If there are multiple different threads open in the story of things that need to be wrapped up, and a couple of them aren't wrapped up in the best way, or a couple of things the character failed to achieve. But then the major things, the main things, the things that have, compelled us throughout the story, those things have to be happy to me. Those things need to be some sort of success, even if the success looks different than what the character set out to achieve. Those sorts of endings I can get on board with. In fact, I kind of like those better than fully happy endings where the character gets everything that they set out to get and everything's just wonderful and beautiful, and all of the trauma that we've gone through this entire book is just gone. That's in the past now. Now everything's happy. That's not necessarily the most satisfying of endings. But if the main thing that they set out to achieve, like, don't give me a romance where one of them dies. Don't give me a villain winning in, like a properly evil villain winning. If I read a book or watch a movie that has an unhappy ending, I'm rewriting that story in my head. So there was absolutely no way that me, as the writer, as the author, as the person controlling the story, would ever allow for an unhappy ending. That isn't to say that every good story has to have a happy ending. There are some really, really genuinely good stories out there that are powerful, that are moving, that have unhappy endings, and they have them for a reason, and that's the ending that that story needs to have. And I know a lot of people enjoy those sorts of endings. They feel like maybe they reflect life a bit more. But for me personally, I don't read fiction or watch fiction or engage with fiction generally to find reality. Those stories need to exist, those stories are wonderful, those stories are beautiful, and those are not stories that I think I will be writing. If I had to give my defense of more bittersweet endings as opposed to unhappy endings, or even fully happy endings, it would just be that those give you a touch of realism. They didn't get everything. Not everything was completely perfectly tied up at the end, but they give you optimism, and that is why I read, that is why I watch movies and series, because even if they dwell on dark and heavy themes and difficult things happen, I want to end with more sense of optimism than pessimism. I want a touch of realism so that it feels like maybe it could actually exist, but an overall feeling of optimism. And that is why I read, that is why I watch, and that is why I write. That is where I'm going to wrap up today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been interesting to hear my whys as well, not just the tropes and elements and themes, but the reasons why I haven't written them yet, whether it was a little bit soapboxy or whether it was, somewhat neutral. I hope most of them felt pretty neutral, but yeah, there were a couple of soapboxes and there weren't there. Like I said, I would love it if you would leave a comment down below letting me know one or even a handful of different, elements or tropes or themes that you also haven't written yet if you're a writer. And if you're not a writer, you can let me know if anything on my personal list is something that you love to find in stories or maybe don't love to find in stories so much. You can also give the video a thumbs up to show me that you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and if you want to see my future videos on books and writing. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another writing video.